Hello all, this is a pre-recorded class intended to satisfy the Rapier Marshal 101 course requirement. There are two types of marshals, Rapier Marshals covered in this class and Rapier Authorizing Marshals. Rapier Marshals are responsible for conducting field-side armor inspections, monitoring individual and melee combat activities, ensuring general combat safety, may be asked to serve as a group marshal and to run practices, and may be a marshal in charge of an event. In order to serve as a Rapier Marshal, you must be familiar with the Kingdom Rapier rules, any relevant Kingdom Marshal rules, the Society fencing rules, and relevant sections of the SCA Marshal Handbook. These materials can be accessed through meridianrapier.org or through sca.org. You must also be a member of the SCA in good standing, hold a Meridian Advanced Rapier authorization, and have viewed this class. Beginning with field-side armor inspections, a detailed list of inspection standards can be found in the Society Fencing Handbook. Field-side armor inspections are pass-fail. If a fighter's equipment fails, you must inform them of the reason and allow them to fix the issue and be re-inspected. You should not touch the fighter without obtaining their permission first in any way. A suggested order for conducting inspections is to first ask the fighter for their legal fighting card, ask if the fighter has their appropriate groin protection, ask if any applicable armor has passed a punch test in the past 2 years, and then conduct an armor inspection from armor first, head to toes, followed by inspecting the fencer's weapons. Following that suggested order, we'll begin with inspecting the fencer's head protection. You should first check the mask or helmet for fit, wear, and padding. The mask should be inspected both on and off the fighter. The mask or helmet must be inspected at each event and every day at multi-day events. The fencing mask must have padding or suspension system to prevent the mask or helmet from impacting the head. Interior of masks or helms without suspension must have a minimum of 1/4 inch of open cell foam or an equivalent padding material. An FIE or USFA approved fencing mask meets this requirement, if in good condition. The mask or helmet must show no signs of rust, broken welds, spread open mesh, or sharp edges. Helmet faceplates must have no holes larger than 1/8 of an inch in diameter, with a minimum offset of 3/16 of an inch. For cut and thrust combat, the back of the head must also be covered by rigid material lined by at least 1/4 inch of closed cell foam padding or the equivalent. All other areas of the head and neck must be covered by an abrasion resistant material, for example, an interior or exterior hood. Moving down to the fighter's neck, throat protection is required. It must consist of rigid material covering the entire throat. Additionally, the cervical vertebrae must be covered by rigid material. Therefore, front-only gorgets are insufficient for meeting this standard. The entirety of the torso, including the chest, back, abdomen, groin, and sides, up to and including the armpits, must be covered with at least puncture-resistant material. Acceptable minimal armpit coverage is provided by a triangle extending from the armpit seam, covering the lower half of the sleeve at the seam, and extending down the inner underarm 1/3 of the distance to the fighter's elbow. You must ask the fighter to step forward and lunge during inspection. Make sure that the torso is still covered by at least puncture-resistant material. External reproductive organs and hemangioma must be covered in rigid armor. For standard rapier, no abrasion-resistant material is required for the limbs. Under cut and thrust combat rules, all areas not covered by puncture-resistant material must be covered by an abrasion-resistant material. During inspection for cut and thrust combat, no skin should be visible. However, current society rules allow for incidental gapping in protective equipment to appear without constituting the need for a hold. For cut and thrust combat, a rigid material or equivalent must cover the elbows and knees. Likewise, for weapons with a closed guard, rigid or equivalent protection is required for the wrist and the back of the hand. For cut and thrust combat using weapons without a closed guard, gauntlets of rigid material or an equivalent material are required. Having inspected the fencer's protective equipment, you should now inspect their weapons. Begin inspecting bladed weapons by checking the overall condition of the weapon. Check that its overall length is within legal range, as well as within the limitations for handle and blade length. Check that the weapon is in generally good repair and free of any major defects. When inspecting the blade, you should check for nicks that can cut an opponent. Run a gloved hand along the edges of the blade. If the blade has substantial nicks, it will need to be filed or sanded and re-inspected. Check the length of the blade for kinks. Weapons with extreme kinks consistent with fatigue cannot be used. Check the flexibility of the blade for compliance with Kingdom and Society standards. This should be performed using 6-ounce weights. Check the weapon's tip visually for any cracks, bulging, or discoloration, or any other signs that the sword is starting to punch through. Check that the tip is secured by pulling on it. If a non-standard tip is used, like one constructed of leather, and it isn't possible to tell if it meets the requirements, check with the fighter to make sure that they know the rules for its construction. With respect to the weapon's keons and pommel, check that the keons and pommels do not have any nicks or any sharp or pointed ends. Weapons with sharp protrusions of this type cannot be used. When inspecting defensive objects, check for any major splinters, burrs, nicks, or features that could injure an opponent. If a buckler or shield appears to be over 24 inches in diameter, it is non-standard in Meridies. Make sure that the fighter knows that they will need to have consent from their opponent to use it in single combat. For soft parry devices, make sure there are not any rigid pieces, buckles, toggles, or other objects which might impact the opponent. When inspecting rapier spears, ensure that the tip is flexible and returns to its original shape within 3 seconds. Check that the head is well affixed to the shaft using an appropriate material. You should check that the haft is an appropriate diameter, length, and material, and check that the haft is free from any dangerous burrs or protrusions. Rattan hafts that appear to be in generally poor condition and likely to break should not be passed. Some general tips or suggestions for conducting inspections include keeping an inspections bag handy with the following items: tape, extra tips, tape measures, files, sanding blocks, pens, and weights for measuring blade flex. You should also keep a Marshal box with the following: a paper copy of the rules, blank paper, note cards, blank copies of paperwork, incident report forms. If you are unsure of a specific piece of armor or weapon, you do not immediately need to make a judgment call. Consult the rules or ask a higher-ranking marshal. When marshaling combat, you may often call for salutes before combat begins. The appropriate order is a salute to the crown, to the fighter's inspiration, to the crowd or populace, and then their opponent. You should ask if the combatants are satisfied with their opponent's arms and armor before combat begins. Prior to engaging in combat, make sure that both combatants are ready before calling lay on. In melee, the marshal in charge will generally confirm all fighters are ready and satisfied. This is often indicated by raising weapons point up above the head. When both fighters have indicated that they are ready, call lay on loudly and clearly. If there are any safety issues, call hold loudly and clearly. A hold should not be called for brief incidental grappling in armor. When marshaling melee, keep a pen and paper to take any notes for writing down names for any incidents. If a situation arises that is not explicitly covered in society or kingdom rules, do not assume it is entirely forbidden. Please use common sense and good judgment. Depending on your duties and responsibilities, you may be required to submit some reports to the Kingdom Rapier Marshal. Quarterly reporting is only required for basic rapier marshals if they are involved in the following activities: helping with an authorization, reporting an incident, or if they have been marshal in charge of an event. After an event ends, the Marshal in charge must send a report to the Kingdom Rapier Marshal. Likewise, incident reports must be directed to the Kingdom Rapier Marshal. Links for all the reports above can be found at meridianrapier.org. Thank you for taking the time to view this class and for your interest in serving as a Meridian Rapier Marshal. Please send a message to the Kingdom Rapier Marshal confirming that you have completed this course. You should request a copy of a blank Rapier Marshal and training form that will contain further information about the requirements for completing the program.